Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's good to see you here this morning. I know our numbers are down a little bit because it's a holiday weekend, but it's good to see everyone here that is here. And it's good to worship with you and be encouraged by your presence and I hope that this morning's sermon will be profitable to you. We're going to be talking about the book of Job. So you might want to take your Bibles and turn to Job chapter 1. I'm just going to be doing some reading from the book of Job, starting at the beginning. Don't worry, we're not going to read the whole book. There's 42 chapters. And we don't have all day, so we're not going to read the entire book of Job. But I am going to read from the first couple of chapters and then a few passages after that, and just make some commentary on what is being said there, what the story is about, and what we can learn from it. This is a book that I studied as literature in 10th grade. And I don't think that I had given it much thought before that, but studying in that venue, it kind of brought it to a new light, and I've kind of been fascinated with it ever since. It's a wonderful story. It's a story that we can learn much from. It tells us why bad things happen to good people, which is a question on pretty much everybody's mind these days because suffering is universal. Everybody has bad times, and everybody wonders why. Why am I going through this? It also helps us to understand the true value of remaining faithful to God. It also helps us to understand, us as teachers, that we have to take care to represent God faithfully. But I am mostly fascinated by this book because it gives us, I think, a glimpse into what is happening behind the scenes of each of our lives. What is going on up in heaven as the devil claims to seek us, or seeks to claim us. As the devil stands before God and accuses us. And to me, it's very interesting to understand that idea and to be prepared for it. So let's begin by reading the first 5 verses of Job. There was a man in the land of Uz. I don't know if that's how you pronounce that, but that's how I pronounce it. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. So this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did continually. And so here the character of Job is introduced. We see that he is a righteous man, that he has been blessed by God with great blessings. And the implication here is that he's been blessed by God because of his faithfulness. And we also see that Job is very careful in his service to God. He even takes responsibility for consecrating his children, just in case they have sinned during their feast days. He rises early to offer sacrifice on his children's behalf. And so by everything we read in these first 5 verses, Job has a very good relationship with God. He is a blameless man and someone to be revered and emulated. All right, let's continue to read verses 6 through 12. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? That there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, who fears God and turns away from evil." Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him, and his house, and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. The next character introduced to us is Satan. Satan is singled out as one of the sons of God. Now, or perhaps he is just an interloper among the sons of God, but nevertheless, we see Satan standing before God, which is quite an alarming thought, that Satan actually appears before God. And God speaks to Satan. They have a relationship, at least a talking relationship. And that thought alone just is alarming to me. But God asked Satan where he has been. Now, have you ever asked your kids, "Well, what did you do today?" Or "Where did you go today?" They said, "Nothing, nowhere." You know, this is the kind of answer that Satan gives to God. He says, "No, nowhere special. Just been walking around the earth." But God knows exactly what Satan has been doing. And so he gets right to the point. He says, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And he seems to be touting to Satan the righteousness and steadfastness of this just man, his servant Job. And apparently this is a challenge to Satan, as if Job represents some sort of failure for Satan. And at this point, Satan cannot stand to let that challenge go. And he shows his true colors, and he accuses Job of being a fair-weather servant. He claims that Job will curse God if God were to remove his hedge of protection. Turn to Revelation chapter 12. Job is not the only passage that presents Satan as the accuser. Revelation chapter 12, beginning in verse 7. "Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated. And there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. For they loved not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. Here Satan is named as the accuser. And this is certainly what Satan was doing against Job. God, for his part, is counting on Job. He's counting on Job to love him more than his own life, as it says here in this passage in Revelation. And he's counting on us to do that today. This is our part in the great war with Satan. But we see that God consents to allow Satan to take away everything that Job has except his health. Now, turning back to Job, we'll begin reading again in verse 13. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to God and said, The oxen were plowing, and the donkeys feeding beside them. And the Sabaeans fell upon them, and took them, and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another, and said, The fire of God from heaven the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. And so seemingly all at once, 4 messengers come and tell Job that he's lost everything he has, including his children. You've heard that bad things come in 3s. Well, for Job it was 4s. 4 messengers, 4 disasters. Job loses everything he has, except for his health and, as we'll see later, his wife. But note how Satan puts God's signature on these disasters by sending the fire from God, the fire of God out of heaven, and the great wind to destroy the house. Surely Job will blame God for the disaster that has befallen him. Turn to James chapter 1. Going down to verse 12. James has something to say about this. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial. For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. This is exactly what the devil was doing. He knew what he thought Job's weakness was. He thought that Job's weakness was all his possessions and his family and the love for them. And so this is what the devil did. He took away all of these. And James cautions us not, when we suffer, as Job did, to blame this on God, to say that we are being tempted on God. And look at Job's response. His response is amazing. He simply tore his robe, he shaved his head, and he worshipped. And he said, blessed be the name of the Lord. He declared that everything that he had lost, was given to him by God. And so it was God's to do with as he pleases. Is this our attitude? Is this the attitude that we have about our possessions and about all of our blessings? Do we recognize that they come from God and God can do with them as he pleases? What a great example for us all in how to deal with suffering. And how this must have angered Satan. And the narrator of our story in Job is careful to tell us that Job did not sin in all of this. Turn back to Job. Job chapter 2. Continuing our story. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason." Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Skin for skin, All that a man has he will give for his life, but stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, Behold, he is in your hand, only spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord, and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. We'll stop there. So the scene in heaven is repeated again. Again, Satan appears before God. God asks Satan where he's been. He says, nowhere special. But we know what Satan really has been doing. 1 Peter 5:8 tells us exactly what Satan was doing. Satan's been on the prowl. He's a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And that's exactly what he's been doing to Job. But he hasn't been able to do it. And so God again gets to the point. And it's almost boasting on God's part of Job's steadfastness and integrity. God's almost saying to Satan, what do you think of that, Satan? What do you think now about your power to destroy my creation? And this time Satan is really indignant. He exclaims, skin for skin. Apparently Satan miscalculated. Satan now insists that the price of Job's obedience is his health. He says if God will touch his skin and bone, will take away his health, that then he will curse God to his face. Remember what defeated Satan in Revelation 12 that we just read? The saints defeated Satan because they did not love their life. It is the only way that we can live. We must not love even our own lives. And so God allows Satan to take away Job's health, but to save his life. And we see that Job is miserable. He's covered in boils from head to toe. There's no place for him to rest. He can't even stand because of the boils on the soles of his feet. And he's reduced to laying in ashes, scraping his sores with a piece of broken pottery. Let's continue reading. In his loathsome state, we are introduced to his wife. Then his wife said to him, Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. We don't know Job's wife's name. We don't know what her relationship with God is like. Maybe she's been faithful up until this time. We don't know. We don't really even know if Satan had a hand in what Job's wife says at this point, although we can imagine that he did. But Job speaks as if this is uncharacteristic for his wife. He says, You speak as one of the foolish women. Perhaps she just can't stand to see her husband suffering like this anymore, and she wants relief for him. Or perhaps she just can't stand to be with him anymore. In this state that he's in, having nothing and not even having health. But whatever the case, her advice is not good. And Job knows that the result of cursing God would only bring more suffering, and that would be eternal suffering. And so even in the face of temptation from his own wife, Job refuses to sin. Job is a good man. Continuing to read. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that had come upon him, they came each from his own place, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. They made an appointment together to come to show him sympathy and comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. And they raised their voices and wept. They tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. So we're introduced to Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, 3 of Job's friends. 3 of Job's friends that in Job's current state didn't even recognize him. That's how bad things were for Job. And they wept for him. We don't know what their relationship with God is, but they seem, as we look at the next few chapters, to know all about him. But it appears that Job's friends are there to comfort him and to sympathize with him. And for 7 days and 7 nights that they do just that. They sit there and they say nothing. They're just there for Job. And they appear to be good friends. But then Job opens his mouth. Let's continue to read. Chapter 3. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And Job said, "Let the day perish on which I was born, and the night that said a man is conceived. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor light shine upon it. Let gloom and deep darkness claim it. Let clouds dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. That night let thick darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Behold, let that night be barren. Let no joyful cry enter it. Let those curse it who curse the day, who are ready to rouse up Leviathan. Let the stars of its dawn be dark. Let it hope for light, but have none, nor see the eyelids of the morning, because it did not shut the doors of my mother's womb, nor hide trouble from my eyes." And he continues on with his lament. Job curses the day of his birth. Job wishes that he had never been born. And it is clear from this that Job is in despair and misery, and he doesn't understand why God has put him in this position. Continuing down in verse 20. "Why is light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter in soul, who long for death but it comes not, and dig for it more than for hidden treasures, who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they find the grave? Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? For my sighing comes instead of my bread, and my groanings are poured out like water. For the things that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes." So Job finally gives voice to what he's been feeling this whole time. He has not sinned against God, but he is also bemoaning the day of his birth. He wishes he had never been born. He wishes for relief from his suffering. And beginning in chapter 4, and moving on through chapter 37, which we will not take the time to read, Job's 3 friends turn, one by one, from offering comfort and sympathizing with Job to accusing him. They are certain that Job has done wrong. Eliphaz in chapter 4, verses 7 through 8. Bildad in chapter 8, verses 5 through 8. And Zophar in chapter 11, verse 20. And then a 4th friend who appears mysteriously, Elihu, in chapter 34, 10 through 12. All express their understanding that Job is suffering because he's being punished by God. He's being punished by God for something he has done wrong. Job, for his part, insists that he has done nothing wrong. Turn to chapter 9. In verse 14, Job says, "How then can I answer him, choosing my words with him? Though I am in the right, I cannot answer him. I must appeal for mercy to my accuser. If I summoned him and he answered me, I would not believe that he was listening to my voice. For he crushes me with a tempest and multiplies my wounds without cause. He will not let me get my breath, but fills me with bitterness. If it is a contest of strength, behold, he is mighty. If it is a matter of justice, who can summon him?" Job accuses here of God of abandoning him and not listening to his pleas, not listening to the fact that he is suffering. In chapter 13 and verse 3, Job desires to argue his case to God. He says, "But I would speak to the Almighty, and I desire to argue my case with God." And in the next verse, the next few verses, he chastises his friends for speaking falsely on God's behalf. "As for you, you whitewash with lies. Worthless physicians are you all. Oh, that you would keep silent, and it would be your wisdom. Hear now my argument, and listen to the pleading of my lips. Will you speak falsely for God, and speak deceitfully for Him?" And so we have this great debate between Job and his friends about why Job is suffering. Job, for his part, is sure that he is in the right. Well, we have New Testament example of this in 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 7. We have an example of one who suffered and who was suffering at the time, but insisted that he had fought the good fight. Paul says to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 4 verse 6, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but to all who have loved his appearing." Just because we are suffering does not mean that we are on God's bad side. Does not mean that we have done something wrong. And just as Job did, if we are right, we should remain true to God. And we should continue to fight the good fight. I encourage you to go back and read chapters 4 through 37 carefully. And there's much to learn here, but we have to be careful to rightly divide the word of truth. We have to remember that Job is the righteous man, and therefore his three friends are accusing him falsely. I've heard brethren actually quote Job's friends to make a point about what is true. And we need to be very careful about that. Not everyone who speaks in the Bible is speaking the truth. So, continuing in Job chapter 38. God makes his appearance and answers Job out of the whirlwind. Job has questioned God about his situation. And so God answers him with questions of his own. And if you look down through chapter 38, which I will not read, through his questioning, God helps Job to see how little Job knows about the works of the Almighty Creator. And he sums it up in chapter 40 and verse 1 and 2. "And the Lord said to Job, Shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it." And Job's response is in verse 3 through 5. "Then Job answered the Lord and said, Behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer. Twice, but I will proceed no further." And then God continues to humble Job by challenging him to make himself powerful, to save himself by his own right hand. If you look down in chapter 40 and verses 10 through 14. And God presents many examples of all the mighty things that he has done in the world. And the point is that God is mightier than all of these. And yet Job dares to question what he does. Let's look at chapter 42, verses 1 through 6. "Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Hear, and I will speak. I will question you, and you make it known to me. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes." Sometimes we need to be patient and wait for God's purpose. Sometimes we do not understand what's going on in our lives. We don't understand the suffering or the blessing that we receive from God. But we need to be patient with God. We need to realize that He is much greater than us. His way is much higher than our way. And if we are patient, that He will work out His plans. Finally, in verses 7 through 9, we see that while Job has been tested with God, he has remained steadfast in his servants. He has questioned God, but he has not misrepresented Him. But that's not the case for Job's friends. Job's friends accused Job of committing sin, and that was not true. They did not know what Job had done, but they were sure that his suffering was a punishment for that. That was not true. And then in their accusations of Job, they misrepresented God. So in verses 7 through 9, we find God's response to this. After the Lord had spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, "My anger burns against you and against your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Now therefore take 7 bulls and 7 rams, and go to my servant Job, and offer up a burnt offering for yourselves. And my servant Job shall pray for you, for I will accept his prayer, not to deal with you according to your folly. For you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has." So Eliphaz the Temanite and Bildad the Shuhite and Zophar the Naamathite went and did what the Lord had told them. And the Lord accepted Job's prayer. God's servant Job, who God had just chastised, was still God's servant, was still faithful to him. And God considered him so. And so he would offer sacrifice for these false teachers. And so as teachers, we need to take this example to heart and realize that if we misrepresent God, if we misrepresent what His will is, and we put our wisdom in place of His, that we will answer for that. Finally, in verses 10 through 17, we see that God restores the blessings that Job had and more. And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job, when he had prayed for his friends. And the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then came to him all his brothers and sisters, and all who had known him before, and ate bread with him in his house. And they showed him sympathy and comforted him for all the evil that the Lord had brought upon him. And each of them gave him a piece of money and a ring of gold. And the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. And he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 female donkeys. He had also 7 sons and 3 daughters. And he called the name of the first daughter Jemimah, and the name of the second Keziah, and the name of the third Keren-happuch. And in all the land there were no women so beautiful as Job's daughters, and their father gave them an inheritance among their brothers. And after this Job lived 140 years, and saw his sons and his sons' sons 4 generations. And Job died an old man and full of days. Job had been a good servant, and he had remained faithful. He had not loved his life so much that he cursed God. And he won the war against Satan. So as we close, I ask, are you ready to fight that battle against Satan like Job did? We may not all be blessed like Job was. We may not all suffer like Job was, God forbid. But regardless of your lot in life, are you ready to fight for God? This devil is out there. He's prowling. He's looking to devour you. He is accusing you before God. Are you ready to lose your life to win the battle against Satan? Or are you going to continue to let Satan stand before God and accuse you? It's decision time. It's time to stand and fight. Make that decision to fight for God. He wants to hold you up to Satan as an example of righteousness and steadfastness. Let's stand and sing.